Our venerable and God-bearing father, Paisios of Mount Athos, also known as Elder Paisios, was a monastic of Mount Athos. An ascetic, he was known by his visitors for his gentle manner and acceptance of those who came to receive his advice, counsel, and blessing. His words of counsel continue to be published. Elder Paisios was canonized on January 13, 2015, by the Holy and Sacred Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. The Church commemorates Saint Paisios on July 12th. Arsenios Enzepitis was born on July 25, 1924, to pious parents in the town of Faraza, Cappadocia, of Asia Minor, shortly before the population exchange of Greece and Turkey following the Greco-Turkish War of 1919 through 1922. Arsenios' name was given to him by Saint Arsenios the Cappadocian, who baptized him, named the child for himself, and foretold Arsenios' monastic future. Very shortly after his baptism, the young Arsenios and his family were forced to leave Asia Minor in accordance with the peace treaty of Lausanne. Saint Arsenios guided his flock along a 400-mile trek to Greece. The Enzepitis family finally settled in the town of Kansida, in Epirus in western Greece. As he had prophesied, Saint Arsenios reposed 40 days after the group settled in Greece, leaving as his spiritual heir the infant Arsenios. Arsenios grew up in Konitsa and learned carpentry after completing an immediate public school. During the civil war in Greece following World War II, Arsenios served as a radio operator. While concerned about his compatriots who had family, he didn't worry for himself because he was single and had no children. He was noted for his bravery, self-sacrifice, and moral righteousness. After the Civil War ended, he wanted to enter a monastic life, but had to consider his sisters who were as yet unmarried. By 1950, he had provided for his sister's future and was free to begin his monastic vacation. He arrived on Mount Athos in 1950, first to Father Kirill, a future abbot, and then to Ephesigimu Monastery. In 1954, Arsenios, having been a novice for 4 years, was tonsured a monk and was given the name Averkios. He was a conscientious monk, following ways both to complete his obediences, which required contact with others, and to preserve his silence, so as to progress in the art of prayer. He was always selfless in helping his brethren. He was unwilling to rest while others worked, though he may have already completed his own obediences, as he loved his brothers greatly and without distinction. In addition to his ascetic struggles and the common life in the monastery, he was spiritually enriched through the reading of soul-profiting books. In particular, he read the lives of the saints, and especially the ascetical homilies of St. Isaac the Syrian. Soon after his tonsure, monk Averkios left Ephesigimu and joined the Ideorhythmic Brotherhood of Phalotheu Monastery, where his uncle was a monk. He placed himself under obedience to the elder Simeon, who gave him the small schema in 1956 and the new name Paisios. Father Paisios dwelt deeply on the thought that his own spiritual failures and lack of love were the cause of his neighbor's shortcomings, as well as of the world's ills. He harshly accused himself and pushed himself to greater self-denial and more fervent prayer for his soul and for the whole world. He also cultivated the habit of seeking the good reason for a potentially scandalous event and for people's actions. In this way he preserved himself from judging others. For example, pilgrims to Mount Athos who had been scandalized by the strange behavior and stories told by a certain monk would, when they met Elder Paisios, ask him what was wrong with the monk. He warned them not to judge others, that this monk was actually virtuous, and was simply pretending to be a fool when the visitors come, so as to preserve his silence. In 1958, Elder Paisios was asked to spend some time in and around his home village, so as to support the faithful against the proselytism of the Protestant groups. He greatly encouraged the faithful there, helping many people. Later in 1962, he visited Sinai, where he stayed for 2 years. During this time he became beloved of the Bedouins, who benefited both spiritually as well as materially from his presence. The elder used the money he received from the sale of his carved wooden handicraft to buy them food. In 1964, on his return to Mount Athos, Elder Paisios took up residence at the Skid of Aviron, before moving to Katunakea, at the southernmost tip of Mount Athos, for a short stay in the desert there. The elder's failing health may have been part of the reason for his departure from the desert. In 1966, a part of his lungs was removed during an operation. It was during this time of hospitalization that his long friendship began with the young sisterhood of St. John the Theologian in Soriti, just outside of Thessaloniki. During his operation he greatly needed blood, and it was then that a group of novices from the monastery donated blood to save him. Elder Paisios was most grateful, and after his recovery he did whatever he could, materially and spiritually, to help them build their monastery. In 1968, he resided at the monastery of Stavronikita, helping with spiritual as well as material renovation. While there, he had the blessing of being in contact with the ascetic Elder Tikhon, who lived in the Hermitage of the Holy Cross, near Stavronikita. Elder Paisios stayed by his side until his repose, serving him selflessly as his disciple. It was during this period that Elder Tikhon clothed Father Paisios in the great schema. According to the wishes of the elder, Father Paisios remained in Elder Tikhon's hermitage after his repose. Father Paisios stayed there until 1979, when he moved to his final home in the Holy Mountain, the Hermitage Panaguda, which belongs to the monastery of Kutlu Musiu. It was at Panaguda that Elder Paisios' fame as a God-bearing elder grew, drawing to him the sick and the suffering people of God. He received them all day long, dedicating the night to God in prayer, vigil, and spiritual struggle. His regime of prayer and asceticism left him with only 2 or 3 hours each night for rest. The self-abandon with which he served God and his fellow man, his strictness with himself, the austerity of his regime, and his sensitive nature made him increasingly prone to sickness. In addition to respiratory problems, in his later days he suffered from a serious hernia that made life very painful. And he was forced to leave the Holy Mountain for various reasons, often due to his illnesses. He would receive pilgrims for hours on end at the women's monastery in Soroti. The physical effort which this entailed in his weakened state caused him such pain that he would turn pale. He bore his suffering with much grace, confident that, as God knows what is best for us, it could not be otherwise. He would say that God is greatly touched when someone who is in great suffering does not complain, but rather uses his energy to pray for others. In addition to his other illnesses, he suffered from hemorrhaging, which left him very weak. In his final weeks before leaving the Holy Mountain, he would often fall unconscious. On October 5, 1993, the elder left his beloved Holy Mountain for the last time, though he had planned on being off the mountain for just a few days. While in Thessaloniki, he was diagnosed with cancer that needed immediate treatment. After the operation, he spent some time recovering in the hospital, and was then transferred to the monastery at Soroti. Despite his critical state, he received people, listening to their sorrows and counseling them. After his operation, Elder Paisios had his heart set on returning to Mount Athos. His attempts to do so, however, were hindered by his failing health. His last days were full of suffering, but also the joy of the martyrs. On July 11, 1994, he received Holy Communion for the last time. The next day, Elder Paisios gave his soul into God's keeping. He was buried according to his wishes at the monastery of St. John the Theologian in Soroti. Elder Paisios, perhaps more than any other contemporary elder, captured the minds and hearts of the Greek people. Many books of his counsels have been published, and the monastery at Soroti has undertaken a great work, organizing the elder's writings and counsels into impressive volumes befitting his memory. Thousands of pilgrims visit his tomb each year. Elder Paisios was glorified on July 13, 2015, by the Holy and Sacred Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. He is commemorated each year on July 12th.